about blogging is that it's got no entry cost whatsoever. So anybody who's got the time and who's got the ideas can be heard.
Deciding that you're going to sit down and write something is the most difficult part.
The compulsion to write, I think, comes from the compulsion to contribute to the wider intellectual debate.
Write what you want to write. Don't write what you think people want to read. If you want to blog, do it.
Well, I'm William Dogood. I write a blog called To September and Beyond, which is about the news. And when I say the news, I mostly mean, not exclusively, but mostly politics, mostly but not exclusively Scottish politics, and particularly the long process our nation is going through to become perhaps an independent nation, or at least a different nation. My particular selling point, if it is one, is that I specialise in humour. I take the mickey out of everything, and hopefully I make people laugh. The descent into the abyss began on Tuesday, when Labour's attention predictably flitted back to that trusty old hobby horse, NHS Scotland, where the standard narrative is to berate the SNP for falling short of self-imposed targets embarrassingly beyond the competence of just about any Labour administration in recorded history. I don't know about you, but I find it hard to contemplate Labour running the Scottish NHS without horrifying visions of Jackie Baillie holding me down while Ian Gray tries to saw off my leg, only to realise halfway through that it's his own.
Something has to give, because for too long there has been a societal acceptance that the threat and consequences of male violence are just part of the female experience. That acceptance has tainted the willingness of the wider public to accept that it shouldn't have to be like this. Fear of violence should not be an inevitable consequence of being a woman. My name's Kirsty Strickland. I'm a feminist campaigner and writer, and I do a blog for Women for Independence on gender balance in current affairs programming. We monitor current affairs programmes in Scotland, Scotland 2015, Sunday Politics Scotland, things like that, and we monitor how many men they have on and how many women. And then we kind of collate the stats and do a blog at the end of it. And the trend that we've found is that on average there's about 3 times as many men as women on these programmes. The reason the blog came about is because Women for Independence as a group, a lot of women noticed the fact that while they were more engaged with political programmes during the referendum, they weren't seeing themselves on screen. They weren't actually seeing that many women talking about the issues that they were talking about. If we are to ever have an independent Scotland, it's really important that we involve women in that discussion. And if women don't see themselves talking about these things, and if there aren't enough women on these programmes to address the issues that they're talking about, then we're never going to be able to use that as a vehicle for change, because we won't bring women alongside us.
On this lies my argument, for surely it must make more sense for us not to be guilty but to be angry. Guilt is worthless in this debate and advances nothing for the future of Scotland or our relationship with other parts of the world. But anger raised in justice can bring forward demands and actions much needed. David Ulusoga pointed out that the compensation given to slave owners after emancipation in 1833, that it was the biggest bailout by the state to any private concern until the 2008-9 banking crisis. The injustice of yesterday forming a despicable pattern today, with the same people being exploited, black or white. And doubtless many of the few that own so much land in Scotland, or the super rich and powerful still ruling over us, are descendants of those compensated. It must be viewed as part of the larger tapestry of exploitation, woven and still woven in the past and in today's world. My name is Robert Somany. I'm a political blogger and poet from London, but now residing in Dunbar. My blog is a mixture of political essays, poetry and cultural critique, most mainly focused on sort of tensions between different sorts of identity. From my own personal experience, it's the tension between Englishness and coming from an immigrant community. But I've also sort of bridged that out to tensions between identities within the British political culture, whether that's between Scottishness and Englishness or within Scottishness itself. And recently I've started writing a lot more about foreign affairs, especially with regards to the Middle East. The heady excitement of storming the Bastille, in a sense, was over when the referendum result came out. And that was heady, that was deeply invigorating, and it's still deeply invigorating. It's still amazing to feel like you're in a nation which things are new, and we're still having these conversations about land reform, and we're still having these conversations about local democracy and local currency. And again, that's why being in Scotland is a great time to write as a private blogger, because there's so much out there which is about new thinking. No one's going to shut you down. No one's going to say that you can't write about this or you can't talk about this. Almost anything is up for debate.
Different voices enrich the political debate and all have the right to be heard, no matter their gender, race or class. We've just had a time where a privately educated commodity stockbroker was seen as being anti-establishment, presumably because he didn't go to Eton. I've tried writing stuff in the past, but it's always ended up being ripped up, thrown in the bin, deleted, and I made this comment to someone last year who basically gave me a right bollocking and said, why are you doing that? So I was approached by Any Voices to write an Englishwoman's opinion of the referendum. That was the first piece that I did, and then they asked me to do a few more pieces and I did them too. So that's kind of got me into writing. I kind of blog for me, not for other people. I blog to get it out of my head. It helps me sort out my arguments for when I'm discussing things face to face. I'm still more keen on changing people's mind on a one-to-one basis. I think people in general need to speak up. I think women need to speak up much more. And this is me basically putting my money where my mouth is. I've got one draft that's to go out, which is basically about the fact that I now wear so much more clothes since I moved to Scotland. And I own thermals, which I never did before.
I use Blogspot, which is www.blogger.com. That and WordPress. But it's pretty easy to set up. There's a wizard that'll take you through it, and you just have to choose a template that you're comfortable with. And I don't do anything I would regard as technically challenging, like putting pictures in, but I'm sure that's easy peasy as well. So not only is it a no-cost entry, you don't really need that much expertise. I mean, if you've got expertise, you can put all sorts of bells and whistles on, but go for it.
I think people do judge it on sort of the aesthetic, what it looks like. So yeah, I swear by Google Blogger. I imagine it like a quarterly, really. I mean, even though I am posting more or less sort of once every 2 days now, I do imagine it as if someone has gone to like a W.H. Smith or gone to like a magazine store and got a snazzy journal, and that's going to be a collectible. I do treat it like that. I don't think just because it's online doesn't mean it can't be snazzy, and just because you haven't paid someone to do a snazzy design on a website doesn't mean it has to look, unprofessional. So that's why I swear by that program, because it just allows you to do that. It allows everything to be nice and slick.
Traditional media wasn't representing what myself or a lot of people felt about things. They were running so many scare stories. A lot of people started speaking up during the referendum, and then it got to the cage of, well, I don't want to stop.
Traditional media at the minute, to me, seems a bit behind the pace. When you think that you can be reading about something on Twitter on Monday and the Daily Record are running it as one of their lead stories on Wednesday, I think they do need to try and catch up a bit if they're to retain or even claw back some of their readership.
The rise of sort of individual bloggers is crucially important because there's so much wasn't being talked about. The views of sort of the mainstream media, whether it came to culture or politics, was so narrow.
What new media has done and what they've really picked up on since the referendum is the Scottish appetite for good quality opinion pieces, good quality blogs. The referendum opened up a whole range of voices to us.
The overall thrust of the media is not to have accepted that this place is changing. And the media is frightened of that, I believe. Possibly because of all the vested interests behind the media, possibly because it just doesn't understand how to get to grips with it. But certainly, for whatever reason, it just isn't reflecting the way Scotland is now and the way it's going, and that will have to change somehow. How we get there, I don't know, but it's bound to change.
So to go back to the traditional news outlets of just your normal papers with the normal middle-class white male columnists that we've had for years in the same papers, I think that's something that outlets like Common Space and Bella Caledonia have really picked up on, that appetite for opinion pieces, and I think they add a lot to the debate that we're having at the minute.
The absolute top end, if you like, or at least the most numerous end, Wings Over Scotland, was transformational, particularly in the early days, and I've got to say it was the blog that I primarily followed when I was forming my views about independence. The discussion below the line is actually fairly feisty and doesn't always agree with everything the Reverend Stewart says, and it's just a good way of just crystallising what your own view might be on something, and so that's very influential. Wee Ginger Doug, another one, and just incredible numbers of people reading him, and now getting is one of the few to break out really into anything like the mainstream media by getting into the National. I know there's another step beyond the National that we need to be thinking about, but nevertheless, how he manages the volume of work that he produces, I really don't know. And to keep the quality up, it's just a tremendous achievement.
I seem to spend an inordinate time reading blogs. I mean, Wee Ginger Doug, without fail. Williams, September and Beyond, I read. I also read Steve Topple's blog. I have a huge list. I've actually done a page on mine of all the different things I read.
Another good one, for example, Scott Goes Pop, James Kelly, which tells you what's really happening behind the polls, and I certainly make a point of having a look for that. Rather less well known though, a chap called Mark Frankland, who runs the First Base. Well, it's more than just a food bank, it's a food bank and advice centre in Dumfries, and he's a proper writer in that. So he has a blog when he can, which talks about, it's from the starting point of his experiences running First Base, and he's got a very characteristic writing style, and I like what he does a great deal. Derek Bateman, of course, I read just for the old school view of the BBC. He still suspects that it's more down to incompetence and bad management, and I'm sure he's got a point, but there you are.
There's been sort of criticisms that even the new media in Scotland isn't as diverse and varied as it can be, and so I think the role of the individual blogger is to be someone that is totally free of any kind of influence whatsoever. And freedom, really, that's the absolute crux.
There's a case to be made for unionism. It doesn't lie in rubbish statistics or rubbish arguments or arguments of fear. But there is a sincere point of view held by many unionists out there, and somewhere down the line we can work together. So at this stage we should be listening to one another, and we should be doing it a wee bit respectfully. Well, don't be afraid of it, I suppose, is the first thing. But be prepared to have a thick skin, particularly if you're going to put stuff down that's likely to make people criticise you.
As you go on, you grow a thicker skin, and we hear a lot about, female writers and female journalists and female politicians, the way that they're sometimes treated on social media when they do put themselves out there. But I think the block button is a wonderful thing, and the mute button is a wonderful thing. And as long as you use both of those tools, then you can filter out all the misogynist guff, and you can filter out all the random abuse that the internet plays host to, and you can actually use it as a tool to develop your writing and to get feedback from other writers who you do admire.
When you start writing a blog, you are very much at sort of the mercy of the people that follow it, and different people follow you for different reasons. So they're going to want something artistic, but they're also going to want something political, and that's in a sense how you keep people interested. You've got to write about different things, and I've had people saying that they've really enjoyed my interesting take, because coming from England and looking at Scottish history and Scottish culture, so I've given them a new insight onto their own culture as well. So that's those kind of responses kind of really do encourage me to write more.
Be sure what it is you want to say, perhaps over a period of time. You don't have to have a unique selling point, but I think the most successful bloggers do have a selling point of some sort. Wee Ginger Doug has his passion, Bateman has his experience, James Kelly has his expertise. I, not classing myself with those, but I have the humour. And so there's something that's a selling point. That's the thing you want to get across time and again. You want people to come to your blog and know what it is they're coming to.
To ask for help, to read bloggers that you like, to read other writers that you like, and to approach them for help. It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't matter how many readers they have or how many followers they have. People are willing to pass on advice to you.
You have to be irritated enough about something to write. So usually I'll have this routine where I'll wake up quite early in the morning and I'll sift through every piece of media I can find. Because in many ways, when you are an individual political blogger, or if you are part of the new media, there is this habit where a lot of what you write is fundamentally going to be a reaction.
I sit there, I get my key points, I sometimes have sentences I'm really proud of. It's then getting them into the right order. I can spend twice as long rearranging it than I actually do writing it.
To women who were thinking about blogging and to women who were thinking about writing, I would say go for it, because we need more female voices. And I think as women we maybe have a tendency to be overcritical of ourselves. So we'll wait until we've got the perfect subject or the perfect idea, and we'll redraft things 15 times until it's perfect before we submit it. I think we need to be more willing just to get our stuff out there.
And you realise that you are educating, and you realise that responsibility, because not everyone can pick up a 500-page book about sort of British involvement in Iran and how that's relevant today. And that's been sort of hugely encouraging, because you realise that you are actually educating people and you have a responsibility. And it defies the idea that because you're an individual blogger, you're going to have lower standards, lower journalistic standards, because you don't have the qualifications or the degree. Actually, if you're serious about the quality of the content that goes on your blog, you're going to make sure your research, your facts, your figures are doubled down, because you realise that, first of all, you're going to get caught out if they're not, but also people are going to respond poorly to the stuff that you write.
By being part of the community, I tweet quite regularly, and I think there is virtue to be had in all the people who are writing something tweeting each other's stuff, because we are all part of a movement.
I've actually been quite surprised by the feedback I've had. I did a series of articles for the Right to End Violence Against Women Awards, which were published in the National. I don't know if it's the readership of the National, or maybe the debate around these issues has just finally grown up a little bit, but I was pleasantly surprised by the feedback that I did get.
I mean, that was the one thing with the referendum, that I couldn't believe how much I read and how much I learnt, and you had to have the answers to everything. And next time the answers will be different, and I need to I need to swat up so I'm ready for it.
The good thing with blogging, especially now the environment we're in post-referendum, is that there's always an audience, there's always a group of people you can speak to in Scotland who are going to be interested in what you've got to say.
And I'd say to anyone, think about what your passions are, what your political background is, and that's going to guide your writing, and that's going to shine through whatever you write.
And I suppose lastly, don't expect to make any money out of it.